Hi, I'm State Senator Joe Markley, back again on the front porch with a little political conversation. What I'd like to talk about today is a topic I think might interest some of you, something that's been in the news and more especially on that snake pit Facebook a great deal lately, which is the gubernatorial campaign of Joe Visconti. I've been meaning to get into it at some point, and an exchange that I was part of last week kind of prompted me to do so. I said last week that I thought that Joe Visconti had jumped the shark, that his moment had passed, and it seemed like a good time to explain the circumstances of that, why I think it's the case, and frankly, why I think it's inevitable that it happened. And again, I'll take a little time to do this, so bear with me if you're not interested in the topic. You've got 10 minutes of boredom ahead of you, but if you are, I hope I can keep your attention. The reason for the exchange was a posting on Facebook by a supporter of Visconti's, Chris Ford, another fellow I've known for some time, attacking my friend Peter Wolfgang and his group, the Family Institute of Connecticut, for their endorsement of Tom Foley. And Chris Ford said that Wolfgang must have been paid off. Put a rather ugly posting up with 30 pieces of silver and so forth, implying that Peter Wolfgang was a Judas. It's interesting, an accusation that was thrown at me also regarding an endorsement not too long ago. And I said at that time, I think that we need to recognize that we have our reasons for supporting the people we support. It doesn't necessarily make us a bad person. We could be wrong, but our reasons should be examined as reasons and respected as reasons. And that accusations, especially accusations which are without evidence and in fact without any truth, like this one, are inappropriate. You get in a point, the Visconti supporters, of having to believe that everyone was paid off. I'm paid off, Peter Wolfgang, the good folks at CCDL, Scott Wilson and the rest of them, my old friend Tom Scott from the anti-income tax movement, Rob Sampson, Martha Dean, whoever you want to pick, who's supporting Tom Foley. And the fact is, I don't think that's true of any of us, certainly not true of me. And but I'm supporting Tom Foley for reasons which I think are strong enough in themselves that I think it's easier to make an accusation than it is to answer. And the first thing I'd start out with is something that strikes me as a fact, let's say a corollary on which we'll premise these remarks, which is Joe Visconti cannot be elected governor of Connecticut, in my opinion. It's interesting that people say, well, there's always a chance, there's a slim chance, there's a little bit of a chance. I'll use a sports analogy, as I so often do in politics. They say on any given Sunday, any professional football team can beat any other team. And if you follow football, you know that's true. But it doesn't mean that any football team at all can beat any other team. We have a fine high school team here in Southington from my alma mater, the Blue Knights. We were state champions just a year ago. I don't think that if the Southington Blue Knights played the New England Patriots 100 times, I don't think they'd win or come anywhere near winning. They don't have the size, the strength, the speed, or anything else. And no number of breaks would be adequate for them over 60 minutes to outplay a good professional football team, or even a weak professional football team. Yeah, I guess that's my point when I say in some cases you don't have a chance. The same thing is true in political campaigns. I've worked with people, I've encouraged people to run in cases where I didn't think it was possible for them to actually win the seat. That's true, in my opinion, in some of the urban state legislative seats here in Connecticut. I think there can be good reasons to run, to carry the banner, to make the argument for the party or for the philosophy, to establish oneself as a candidate maybe for another office in another year, to help build the party in the cities. You don't always have to win to accomplish something, but you have to recognize whether the possibility of winning exists or not. I'll give you one more example on this ground before we leave it. I'm often encouraged, people say, oh, you should run for governor. I should be running for governor this time. Oh, certainly I could have woken up and decided to run for governor. I don't think I could be elected governor, but an argument could be made that I would be let's say, a quasi-legitimate candidate, that I'd be taken seriously, at least in the nomination process up to a point. But if I got up and said, I think I'll run for president, I'm going to go to New Hampshire and start shaking hands, even my best friends would have to wonder what had happened to my mind and my judgment. It's just not in the cards. That's more of a leap than I could possibly make. And I would not be able to establish myself as a serious candidate. I'd be one of the circus of also-rans and misfits that declare for president. There's scores of them every year, but aren't taken seriously by anyone. I would say the analogy of me running for president is something like the analogy of Joe Visconti running for governor. He's not in position, as a friend of mine once said. The forces against him are too strong, and it's not going to happen. So that's my underlying premise. If I'm right about that, that's something that people can differ over, but I really think anyone who knows politics will agree with me. Then the question is, what are the effects of Joe Visconti running? Is there anything useful to be done by that campaign? As I implied before, it's not always a mistake to run when you can't win. One of two things is going to happen in November. Either Dan Malloy is going to be reelected, or Tom Foley is going to defeat him. Those are the only two possibilities. If Tom Foley wins, despite Joe Visconti's candidacy, I think the lesson for mainstream Republicans will be, I guess, those Second Amendment people, I guess those anti-Common Core people, I guess those Tea Party people, insofar as they're identified with Visconti, don't really matter that much. We don't need them in the party. Now, that, to my mind, would be an unhappy result, but I think that's the only conclusion that could be drawn if Foley's elected despite a Visconti candidacy. If Malloy's elected, Malloy himself and his people are going to say, we hit conservatives in Connecticut as hard as we could hit them. We raised taxes, we increased spending, borrowing exploded, we passed the most restrictive gun laws in the country, we pushed through state control of education, and the people stayed with us. Their goal in their second term will be to go even further. They'll believe that they have a mandate to continue to stick it to us as conservatives in Connecticut. Now, of course, my concern is that the Visconti candidacy basically hurts Tom Foley, that the pro-Second Amendment people and others who might support Joe Visconti otherwise would be votes that went to Tom Foley. And as we all know, Foley only lost by a little over 6,000 votes. If you work it out, 37 votes from every town and city in Connecticut, a very, very close election. It will probably be a very close election again. And for an independent candidate to pick up 10, 15, 20, 25,000 votes, which I think is possible, could very well be decisive. Is electing Foley that important? And here I'll repeat something I said on a previous video. We often hear about the lesser of two evils, and I think it's a term that tends to deceive us. First of all, to a greater or lesser extent, as the New Testament tells us, we're all evil. All of us come short in a way, morally in an absolute sense, but politically in a sense too. There's nobody I agree with all the time in politics, myself included. I look back on things that I've supported and votes I've taken that I wouldn't do the same way. I do the best I can. I try to stay as true as I can to my principles and have my reasons. But none of us is perfect. The question we have to ask ourselves is Tom Foley on our side or not? And this is where there's an enormous difference between Dan Malloy and Tom Foley. There may be people that wish that Tom Foley were more aggressive in his opposition to the gun measures that passed, for instance. But by no means was he the sponsor of them. That was Dan Malloy. If we're talking about somebody being evil politically, to use that term, That's Dan Malloy. He's against us on almost every issue we're talking about. Tom Foley is not. The worst that can be said of Tom Foley is that he is not as strong an advocate as some of us would like. And I suppose there's very few people that are quite as strong as I'd like to be, and then there's a few people that think I'm not strong enough. So all of us fall short. But I think that the difference between Tom Foley and Dan Malloy in what they believe and what they would do as governor is night and day. You can decide whether it's midnight versus high noon, or whether it's 1 in the morning versus 4 in the afternoon. But it's night and day to my mind, however you look at it. And nobody else has a chance of beating Dan Malloy except Tom Foley. The other thing I'd say in the world of lesser two evils is this premises somehow that Joe Visconti is an ideal candidate for governor. And I'd say that we can talk about, I won't even get into Joe Visconti philosophically. Obviously, questions are raised, for instance, on his commitment to a pro-life position. That in a certain way he takes a position that a lot of us find unsatisfying, which is to say he's personally opposed, but he doesn't see that this is necessarily a governmental matter. But I'll leave the philosophy aside. We have to ask if we believe that Joe is a man who is capable and prepared to actually serve as governor of Connecticut, and that's no small thing. That's like to say it's like taking over a major corporation, taking over a football team, if we went back to a sports analogy. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and say, I know what I'd do if I were coach. But to actually walk in and have to run the entire operation is a very different thing. I don't think Joe's got the background for it. He can be a charmer. He's a man of vision in certain ways. He's a fighter. There's some things about Joe I respect. But I don't know that he has the experience. I don't know that he has the kind of the steady hand that might be needed, or the tact, or the clarity of thought that I'd want to see in a governor of Connecticut. We have to be honest about our endorsements that way and say, when we back somebody, do we really have confidence in them? Not are they our friends, do we like them, do we find them entertaining, but do we really think that they can do the job that we are claiming we believe they can do to others? And that's a representation I have become increasingly careful about making. And the last thing I'd say about Joe and his character is, as I think we all know, he essentially has broken his word already by becoming an independent candidate for governor. He certainly told me in no uncertain terms, face to face, that he would not do this, that he was going to get into the Republican primary, and that win or lose, that was the end of his effort. And he said that to many of us, many of you, over many, many months. That would have been a very easy promise for him to keep, and nothing changed that made it impossible for him to keep that promise, except the difficulty he had in getting signatures to run in a Republican primary. That turned out to be a harder job than he thought. And also the difficulty he had in getting the delegates to qualify for the primary, which proved impossible. I have to say, I think at this point, this campaign for governor is more about, let's say, the pleasure of running, the pleasure that some people find in the attention that they receive, and the sense of mission of the people around him. You can get in a situation like this where you convince yourself you have a chance, kind of in that echo chamber, and it's a dangerous thing to do. So I guess my point is to say I don't see it. I think that most conservatives who care deeply about this state don't feel that a Visconti candidacy is useful. And I hope that Joe and the people who are supporting him think very, very carefully about what they're doing, because they're playing a very serious game which could have long-lasting consequences, not just for a political party or for a political movement, but for the entire state of Connecticut. Re-electing Dan Malloy, I think, would almost be the last straw for us. And Joe Visconti could be the man, and his supporters could be the people who are responsible for doing that. They still have a chance to change their mind. This is Joe Markley. I will be back on another topic in a couple of weeks, And as always, interested in hearing your feedback on this video. Thanks very much.